Hello everybody, Joanna here. Today I'm going to be going over my top 10 books of 2022, and I'm excited and nervous to discuss this list because I feel like my list has shifted around a lot, and there are several books that I read in the first half of the year that I'm a little surprised are not on this list. So this might be not the most reliable list because I think my thoughts on books tend to change over time. I feel like there's a journey of enjoying a book when you're reading it, and there's a whole other journey of enjoying and digesting the story and finding the impact it has long after you finish a book. And so it's going to be a little difficult with the books I read more recently to know that this is the right order on the list, but we're just going to go with it and have fun and not take this too seriously. I am not going to add any honorable mentions to this list because I feel like if I have a honorable mention, I'll probably have to list 10 honorable mentions. And so I want to challenge myself to keep it at 10. And so coming in at number 10 is Children of Doom by Frank Herbert. So this is the third book in the Dune Chronicles. I read Dune Messiah last year, reread the original Dune before that last year, and I was so satisfied with Children of Dune. I felt like this completed a great arc for me in the Dune series. I felt very satisfied with it at the end. I loved the family drama that happens in this book. I love all the themes regarding, of course, ecology and leadership and power and mystique, so many different things. And I also just really appreciated the way that he plotted out the story. When I got to the end, I went back over my quotes and highlights, and I just appreciated it even more. And it made me want to go back and reread all three books all over again. So for a book to get me that excited, it definitely makes its way onto my list. And this will not be for, I think, a lot of modern readers because it does have the omniscient narrator that I know is not fashionable these days, and it does have characters that are on the flatter side, and I know people aren't really crazy about that nowadays, but I did really love it. And I say if you loved Dune Messiah, then I highly encourage you to read on and read Children of Dune. I don't know yet if I'll read the fourth book, God Emperor of Dune. I might, just to experience more wormy weirdness, but I am again satisfied with Children of Dune. Coming in at number 9 is possibly one of the most unique books I've ever read, and that is An Inventory of Losses by Judah Sholonsky. This is translated from German into English by Jackie Smith, and this was absolutely beautifully written. I intend to reread this at some point. It has stuck with me. There is something about the way Sholonsky writes that really got me to think about things. It got me to wonder. And again, it just stayed with me over time. So this is one I read at the very beginning of the year, and it explores loss. It's an inventory of losses, but it explores it in 12 different stories. We get this perspective that's historical, that's fiction, that's autobiographical. It has a blend of genres, and it's just fascinating the way she gets you to think about things that have been forgotten and the value in that as well. So in fantasy, the genre I read the most from, I feel like we often get the exploration of history and the way history is written by the victors or, is rewritten in some way. This book will get you to think about all the things that are not recorded in history and about those spaces that we want to fill, and the meaning of that and the meaningfulness that can come out of that. So I'll go ahead and read a quick quote just from the foreword to give you an idea of what she's going for here. To forget everything is bad, certainly. Worse still is to forget nothing. After all, knowledge can only be gained by forgetting. If everything is stored indiscriminately, as it is in electronic data memories, it loses its meaning and becomes a disorderly mass of useless information. And she goes on from there. But I just thought this was one of the most unique books I've ever read. Again, I intend to reread this at some point, and it definitely makes the list not only as a top 10 for the year, but also as one of the most unique books I've ever read. Coming in at number 8 is going to be To Ride Hell's Chasm by Jenny Wirtz. Now, I easily could have chosen her first book, The Curse of the Mist Wraith. I am going to be challenging myself, though, to choose only one book by an author on this list. So I'm going to go with To Ride Hell's Chasm. This book is one of the best fantasy standalones I've ever read. Something that Jenny Wirtz does very effectively as a writer is she has a way of gradually building the stakes in a story and delivering such a satisfying ending. And I feel like she does that to perfection in this book and even in Curse of the Mistwraith, even though Curse of the Mistwraith is book one in a huge 11-book series. And I found, of course, the themes excellent. We explore racism. These two princes from different cultures come together to try to find this missing princess. It's a very simple premise in Two Ride Hell's Chasm, whereas in Curse of the Mistwraith, it's much more complex. But I think that if you want to get introduced to her writing, this is the way to go. Now, I will say her writing does take some time to get used to. It took me at least 90 to 100 pages in both books to find a flow with her writing. Once I adjusted, and this is a personal thing, it's always going to be a personal thing, I found I just was able to flow with it once I adjusted, but it did take me that time. And she does that very purposefully. I know when we talked about this book over on Philip's channel, she said that she writes in a way that she wants her language to be timeless, so you won't find it having a ton of modern conventions in her writing or anything like that. It's written in such a way that is made to slow the reader down. And she explained that she does that because she feels like some of the best experiences in life are when we take our time, when we slow down to savor things. I think this is the way to go again if you're new to Jenny Wirtz as an author. And this takes my place at number 8 on my list. Number 7 on my list is one of the more difficult choices for me as far as where I'm ranking it. It's going to be Farseer with Robin Hobb, but to choose one book is the hard part about this particular decision. So when it comes to Farseer trilogy, I really loved the Farseer trilogy, but if I had to pick a favorite book, it's difficult because I think I loved the middle of this book the most. I loved the end of this book the most. And with Assassin's Quest, I think I loved the beginning the most, though there were things at the end of that book that stay with me. And the other thing that makes this difficult with Robin Hobb and with Farseer is that while I loved the trilogy, the more I think about it over time, one, I can't stop thinking about it. That's one thing. I've noticed over time, I keep thinking about Farseer trilogy. I've thought about it all year ever since I finished it. And the other thing is that I keep getting angry every time I think about it. There are certain things that happened in this series that make me more and more angry, which I don't think is typical. I think that's an unpopular opinion. I think I have some unpopular opinions about a couple of characters in this trilogy, but I still loved it. And being angry is actually not a bad thing. It's the fact she got me to feel things so much. If I had to choose one book, though, it's so hard because the ending of this book still gets to me so much. But I think I'm going to go with Assassin's Apprentice because this book was my introduction to Farseer. It was my introduction to Robin Hobb. And in this particular book, I don't know, I can also make a case for Royal Assassin, but I felt a connection with Fitz that I cannot describe to you. I felt like seeing through Fitz's character in a weird way. I think I just have to go with this one. I might change my mind later, but I'll go with this one for now. So I'm going with Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb as my choice. And I know that's a very unpopular opinion, but that's it. Number 5 on my list is Wizard and Glass by Stephen King. This is book 4 in the Dark Tower series. This has personal significance for me because it's a framed narrative. I love a framed narrative. But the thing about this framed narrative, I felt this deep connection with the quartet in that one. I felt like I was feeling what they were feeling with the story within the story as they were experiencing it. And I felt a connection to Roland in that story. And this has the forbidden love trope, which is one of my favorite things of all time. I love forbidden love. And I love the way it was achieved in that book. There were so many things I love about that particular book. I did do a full review if you want to hear even more gushing. But that is by far my favorite Dark Tower story. And one that will stay with me. If I could reread any book from the Dark Tower series, it would be that one. Number 5 on my list is The Warrior Prophet by R. Scott Baker. This is book 2 in the Prince of Nothing trilogy. Another trilogy where I have a difficult time choosing a favorite because each book in this trilogy, it really has something special and different to offer. and it impacted me in a very different way. And I really struggled, especially between books 1 and 2, I would say. But I'm going with book 2 because there were certain moments in book 2 that will stay with me forever, that are just lasered into my memory. The tragic elements of this book were so perfectly executed, and Baker just has a way with words. What a gifted writer. So this trilogy overall was a success for me. It is not a comfortable trilogy. It is one I do not universally recommend, but overall I'm impressed with Baker's prose and what he did and the way he executed the tragic elements of the story, and his character work was so incredible. So The Warrior Prophet will take my number 5 spot. Coming in at number 4 is Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke. Now, if you know the story behind this with me, I soft DNF'd this about 10 years ago. I've always intended to get back to it, and this was the year. This was the year that I got back to it. It's very short, but for whatever reason, I had a difficult time getting through it the first time. And so I picked up the audiobook of this. I think that the name of the narrator, I'll put it on the screen again, or I'll put it in the description, or ask me in the comments if I don't do that, and I'll let you know. I'll have to look it up. It was on Scribd, but it was the audiobook to this particular edition, which was translated by Joan M. Burnham. And so this is the particular edition or translation that I prefer, and I could not stop crying when I listened to it. And in these letters, Rilke shares such profound wisdom about living by that inner voice inside of you as an artist, learning not to seek external validation, but to be patient and still and go within to the depths of your being. And there was just something so beautiful about the way he explained it that was inspiring to me, even though I'm not a writer. If you are a writer, I think you should definitely get to this one at some point. It was just so beautiful. It is nonfiction because it's a collection of letters. So I know that's a weird one to put on the list, but this one just has to go on my list because it was so emotionally moving for me. So this is number 4 on my list, Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke. Number 3 on my list might suffer from some recency bias because I did just recently finish this book, but I have to include it anyway. And that is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Now this book is crazy. It is crazy. It is wild. It is surreal. It is dreamlike. It is bleak. It is brutal. It is distressing in every possible way. We're talking about scalping Indians and horrible animal abuse in here, which was actually kind of triggering for me at times. And I'm not somebody who usually gets triggered by animal deaths and stuff in books. This one triggered me. This one was uncomfortable a lot of the time. At the same time, I was in awe of this book. Pretty much every single page in this book, I could find sentences, more than one usually, that I would just be in awe over. Like, how did he write that? How did he capture that? We're in the Southwest, and that has personal significance to me because I'm from the Southwest. I love the desert. I have family from Chihuahua. I'm from New Mexico, by the way. And this is devastating because we're talking about scalping Indians. There's tons of racism against not only Black people, but Indians and Mexicans. So it's not an easy read, but at the same time, I think that he had some important things to say about, it's a very nihilistic book. What can I say? This was so nihilistic that there's a passage in here in which one of the characters, the judge, basically talks about this concept that there is no other life outside of Earth, that Earth is all that exists as far as humankind, as far as sentient beings, and there's nothing out there. There's nothing out there in space or beyond, no aliens. And it was weird because I read that and I got depressed. I got depressed because I was so immersed in the story that the idea that humanity, as it's depicted in this book, which is so awful, so horrible, that that's all that exists, made me so depressed. And I thought that was interesting considering that historically, like pre-Galileo, there was no question that humans were the center of the universe. And I think that people were very scared of the idea that something else could exist out in space in the universe. And for me, thinking this is all that exists was terrifying and awful because, again, humans are violent and brutal. Everything in this book was so hard to swallow, and at the same time, I just cannot get over the way that Cormac McCarthy can break every convention in literature and storytelling and still deliver an experience unlike any other. He has a way of describing the desert in so many ways. Any other author would just describe a barren landscape, maybe a tumbleweed here and there, maybe a couple of plants. No, Cormac McCarthy describes the desert in a multidimensional, cosmic, surreal way. And as I'm reading it, I feel like I'm seeing it in my mind as it normally is, and at the same time seeing it in this otherworldly, crazy, surreal way. The way he captures that through words, I don't know how he does it. And even the characters are weird. They're so weird. There is so much absurdity in this book, and there's so much to say regarding themes. But overall, this one was crazy wild, and it impacted me. I think I've said enough for now. This one takes third place. Number 2 on my list is Enemy of God by Bernard Cornwell, and this is book 2 of the Warlord Chronicles. And my goodness, this book. This book has it all, but what I loved about this book is it's told in first-person narration by the character Derval. I really enjoyed book 1 in the trilogy. I really enjoyed The Winter King, and I went right into Enemy of God, if that tells you anything, but I loved Enemy of God. That book cemented my love of this character Derval. I loved the family drama in this book. This has a Tristan and Isolde retelling. Anybody who knows me knows that Tristan und Isolde by Wagner is my favorite opera of all time. I already mentioned that I love Forbidden Love. This book has so many incredible moments, just one right after another. It was such an emotional roller coaster. It's packed with important themes. Of course, it's an Arthurian retelling. We have Merlin. We have so many things that I adored in this particular book. I love that entire trilogy, but yeah, my heart goes to book number 2. And number 1, you already all know, it's Stoner by John Williams. The opposite of epic fantasy, but I love this book. I love the way John Williams writes. I think it's his skill as a writer that makes this book what it is. It's about a man named Stoner, an English college professor. It's the ode to the ordinary man, and it took my heart. I talked about this a little bit with Alan, but I think that one of the things that is so special for me about this book is that some of us feel like we are ordinary people living ordinary lives, and that we're not going to mean anything to people. And maybe we don't. Maybe people don't think really twice about us, but that doesn't mean we don't have an impact. That doesn't mean that we're in some way informing their narrative, even in their own minds, of what an ordinary person is. And I really love that we get this close, zoomed in perspective of somebody who might fit that description, that we might not think twice about. So for me, this book just won my heart. Again, I think it really is due to John Williams as a writer. I credit him for that. And I could have easily put Augustus in this slot too, because both books are so good, and I will be talking about both books in a future video. But this one just won my heart. It really won my heart. I still think about it. I will reread it someday. And I'm sorry if you read this book and think I'm crazy. I have to put it in my number 1 spot just from a personal connection, because again, this top 10 list is a personal thing. That is it. That is my list. So thank you so much if you watched this entire video, even if you already knew what my number 1 book of the year was. I would love to hear from you in the comment section below what your favorites were, or what you think of any of these books that I mentioned. And I thank you for being part of my 2022. And I wish you all a wonderful 2023. Bye-bye.